Okay, so I got a lot of my information from a very short documentary that you can find on Instagram called La Aparición. It was filmed by Ana Maria Garcia in 1981. So she went around and did a lot of interviews with different women and stuff like that, and asked them a lot of questions about what happened. The documentary starts off with her asking questions about a woman and how the sterilization happened with her. This woman's entire family has been sterilized. Their generation is no longer going to continue. All of this happened because of eugenics. All of this happened because of eugenics and because of greed and because they wanted to use the island of Puerto Rico for money and profit. That is why. We're going to start out, okay? So by the time that documentary had been created in 1981, a third of Puerto Rican women were sterilized at that point. So there's going to be a little picture that Deidre's going to put up. It's going to be of the island. It's going to have little symbols on it of people. And each of those little symbols on there represents about 1% of the female population. So when I talk about some of these percentages, I'm going to talk about them in the ways of what it's showing through that image. So I'm going to start off first. In 1989, before 1989, the island was literally just farmland, just people farming, people living off of it, people doing their thing, just living their life based off of what, their culture and what they were doing and feeding each other and so on and so forth. United States troops decided to land in and go in with their troops. They decided to just conquer the island. So 2 years later, after troops set foot on the island, a man named Charles Allen, he was the first North American civilian governor, complained that there were too many Puerto Rican men who were laborers and not enough who were... Give me a second. Who were too many laborers and not enough in capital. So they came in and they said, y'all doing too many poor people shit. We don't want you to do poor people shit anymore. We want some of you people to actually be in capital. What I think happened is they came in and they saw a very rich and healthy land that they could use to gain further capital and make money. So by 1930, corporations had already owned about half of the land. They came in and they were like, fuck y'all and your farmland. We're going to take over this shit, which displaced thousands of people. Like, they had no work. These factories popped up and they started doing work in the factories and stuff like that, but it wasn't enough work for the amount of people that were on the island. So then small farmers went to work planting sugarcane during that time. By 1937, unemployment reached about 37% on the island. So American troops basically came in. 2 years later, they were like, hey, we're going to build all this shit because we want to make money off of your fucking land. And we're going to build all this shit and we're going to make all of this money, but you guys are going to live in poverty still. Okay? So when the governor thought at that time, Charles Allen, when he thought that there was too many people, he started to propose population control. He proposed population control. This was not an unknown thing. This was not a secret. This was very much open and supported by the United States. This was openly supported by the United States. There was propaganda that was put out. There was flyers. There were commercials that were being made. There were people that went door to door convincing people of this. This was not hidden. This was widely accepted by American people.
And it's not a surprise because that's literally what was happening here.
Yeah.
Like, they were just like, yeah, we do it here too. Like, enjoy, please.
Yeah.
Live it up.
Well, they're basically like this because at this time, Puerto Rico was not part of the U.S. So they were like, oh, well, we're going to not part of the U.S. in that way.
Yeah. I know what you mean.
But they were not people to them. They were not people. The whole island, an entire country, was unworthy of being looked at as humans. It was cash cows. It was a place where they can. It was a place where they can get money. So in 1937, Law 116 was passed, which made sterilization legal on the island. So they passed this law and they were like, okay, cool, it's legal. We can go ahead and start with population control, right? But it was based off of the principles of eugenic, which basically promoted the breeding of the fit and weeding out the unfit, which was basically the poors and non-whites. Keep in mind, 37% at this time were unemployed. Okay, so that's a very big amount of people, because during this time, I think roughly there was about 636 people per square foot on the island. 636 people per square foot. Remember that number. I'm going to have to look a lot at this because I have a lot of notes. But anyways, this is why sterilization was encouraged to women in poverty. There was a gentleman by the name of Blanton Winship. He was a governor at the time. He called the unemployed and the poor's excess population. It's just excess. It's just, it's like when you got to trim the fat on some fucking chicken. It's just excess that doesn't need to be there, right? So when they passed this law in 1937, they started to encourage women who were in poverty to get sterilized. There were flyers, again, that were sent out, all of this. Winship stated, and I quote, "to fill the urgent need to avoid the menace of their ever-growing population." So there were commercials that were being put out in the U.S. that were showing that if you go to Puerto Rico, that everybody in there is climbing on top of each other, that they live like rats. They're all over each other like a pack of fleas. Like you are on each other like ants. There's no space to move. There's no nothing. It's just nothing but people and overpopulation, and everybody's poor and nobody has this. Keep in mind, it was not poor like that before the United States came in. Was it super wealthy and industrialized and doing all this? No, it was not. But it was not poor the way it is when the United States came in with their troops. So it was given out for free with the consent of their husband, so they didn't actually have to pay for the sterilization. It was promoted as it was free. There were, over time, some clinics who were charging women $75, and in the 30s, $75 in the 30s equates to $995 today. So they were like, you can go ahead and get this done. But the government was paying for this. This was federally funded for people to come in and get sterilized. And it was pushed on people. But these women were not educated on what the sterilization was. They weren't told any of it. Yeah. They weren't told that it wasn't reversible. They weren't told any of these things. They were just put in and they were experimented on and they were taken out. And a lot of this stuff wasn't even experimentation. It was just the fact that they didn't like that there was a population. They didn't like it. They didn't want that. The entire purpose of the sterilization for the whole island was specifically so that they could have more women working in the factories. That was the main purpose of that, was population control, and so that they could have the women working in the factories. They wanted everybody working in their goddamn factories. Everybody, right? We'll get to that point. We'll get to that fucking point. So during this time, needlework flourished in Puerto Rico during World War II, because they had a lot of the factories and a lot of the men went to war and stuff like that. So women stayed behind and they worked in the factories and they were doing needlework. The law passing sterilization happened during this time, and due to the women primarily working, it forced them to get sterilized so that they could continue working. Because here's what happened. These companies came in. Sorry, it was in companies. The government came in, these government employees that were part of the Family Planning Associates or Family Planning Association. They would come into these companies and they would come into these corporate buildings and these factories, and they would go to them and they would say, hey, this would actually be financially beneficial to you if you get these women to be sterilized. If you can convince them to get sterilized, because then you won't have to pay for maternity leave. You won't have to, at the time, when you had a baby, the job that you worked with paid for your hospitalization, it paid for your birth, it paid for all of that. You got maternity leave, you got this, and they came in and they said, if you get these women to be sterilized, you won't have to deal with that. Just look at how much you will save. Look at how much money you will save if you can convince these women to go get sterilized. And that was one of the main reasons why they were doing that. So by 1964, 6.5% of childbearing women were sterilized. Now, remember when I said that picture, that image that I stated, each individual, little spot that's on there was 1%. That's what I'm referring to. 6.5% of that's what I'm talking about. That had already been sterilized. So at this point, I believe it was about a little over a third had been sterilized at that point. So they actually even had it in grammar schools. So you were taught at a young age, the Family Planning Association, they put in these grammar schools in the books to have a small family. It was beneficial to have a small family, no more than two. You know what is so funny about this to me, though, is that there was such an uproar, a huge uproar in the United States when China decided to push for the two-child home law.
It's like, did you forget your history?
But they were in an uproar. How could they do that?
Why would they do that to these people?
That is so terrible. This is all.
You forgot?
They forced people. They promoted this and forced women to become sterilized and said two children per home. 2 children per home. These children, if you had more, were not displaced. They weren't displaced or they didn't go as far as China did, where you had to send your child off because that child could be put to death. No, there wasn't necessarily direct gendercide that was occurring, because gendercide refers to the mass killing of a specific gender, which usually in China it refers to females. The females are usually the ones that are murdered, along in India as well in several other countries. There's a whole documentary on it called Gendercide if you'd like to go look at it. It's been occurring for years. But anyways, I digress. So the whole reason why they did this, they promoted it in grammar school. So from a young age, you're reading that two per household, that's it. Keep in mind, they were not telling these women about any other contraceptive options. They were not talking about any of these things. They weren't talking about, whatever other contraception options were there. They were literally just focusing on population control with sterilization. That is what they were pushing. That is what they were promoting. That is what they were advertising. And they were doing it and showing these families with big, beautiful houses and luscious homes and gardens and fronts with their 2 happy children. And that's what you were supposed to have. So, it would show a family of 4. A small family meant progress. So los tiempos cambian, or what is referred to times change. Put on informational programs and encouraging small family and population control. Basically, they were saying no abortion. You cannot get an abortion, but absolutely 100% get sterilized. Absolutely 100% get sterilized. And
so we want to control the population, but like we want to control it forever. You can't just have an abortion and because you could potentially get pregnant later on. Exactly. And then what are you going to do? You can't abort them all.
And at this point, the government was like, we're not going to fund abortions, but we will fund the sterilization. So what they did, and when I say sterilizations, they didn't necessarily do hysterectomies for them. They did bilateral salpinectomies, which means what I had, which is called a tubal ligation. But at the time, what they told people was that it was just getting your tubes tied. They weren't actually going in and cut and burning these tubes. They were removing them completely. So it was complete removal, but they weren't telling these women that it's not reversible. They weren't telling these women that that's what's happening. So some would take the full tube, some would cut the ends, and then they would tie a black string. And these women, they didn't know. They didn't know. They were not educated on it. They were just told that this is what's going to help you and your family and they would go in and they would be shamed. They would be shamed. These doctors would look at them and be like, you're poor. Literally. This woman said verbatim, the doctor looked at me and said, you're poor. You can't take care of these kids. Why would you have another one? Why would you want to have another one? You can't even take care of the kids that you have now. These women were shamed. They were shamed for having children because they wanted them to work in these factories. So at this time, when migration started occurring, April 30th, 1945. So not only was there mass sterilization on the island, but there was also a huge push for migration, huge push for people to leave. I mean, they were causing people to be, they opened up, America was so nice and gracious enough to open up their borders to the Puerto Ricans. And they said, go forth and find employment and go do things, because what they wanted was they wanted to use this island for the tax-free purposes of Operation Bootstrap, which I'll get to in a second. Because Operation Bootstrap started in the 1940s, and that's when these companies would come in and they would be able to build all of their factories and mass produce all of these things without any taxes, which is what they still do to this day. So, anyways, by 1930, I'm sorry, April 30th, 1945 is when there was a huge increase in sterilization during this time, as well as over 1 million Puerto Ricans who were forced to migrate or convinced to migrate or coerced to migrate to other places. And you know where they fucking migrated to primarily? Was Manhattan, New York. And do you want to know? Remember how I said there was only about 639 people per square feet on the island? There was 9,000 people per square feet in Manhattan when this migration was occurring. 9,000 people per square feet in Manhattan when this was occurring. So this wasn't about population control and so on and so forth. The population control was just an image to be portrayed so that they could convince people so that they can gain money. It is the same shit that is happening in America today. Everything is about gaining finances, financial gain. That is
fuck people.
They don't care about people. They don't care about people.
And don't be a minority.
Don't be a minority because you're gonna get fucked.
You're gonna get fucked because fuck you for real, for real.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So between 1945 and 1964, about a third of the population had already migrated from Puerto Rico. So again, there wasn't a huge population to begin with, but they migrated, right? By 1955, there was a confidential report from the island's government that actually suggested they wanted an approximate 60,000 people to be migrated within a certain time frame. This is a official government document that stated this. Shipping people out was an actual official policy. An actual official policy. Right? So let's go ahead and talk about Operation Bootstrap.
Here we go.
In the 1940s, Operation Bootstrap offered U.S. corporations tax-free operations on the island, cheap labor, and big profits. By 1952, the colonial status was changed to the Commonwealth or a free associated state. Now, what that means is under the Commonwealth, Puerto Ricans can vote, but it can be overturned. They have no control. Essentially, what it means is that you are controlled by the U.S. We're going to give you the illusion that you're going to be able to actually maintain your own government and have your own laws and do your own shit. But if we don't like what you're doing, we're going to overturn it ourselves and we're going to say, no, that's not how it's going to work. That's not how it's going to work. So they like to give people the illusion that they have a free state, and they promoted this as that. You're going to be free. You're going to have all of these stuff. You're going to be able to do all of these things, and there's going to be so much profit and joy and blah, 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 now that you're a free state. That's not how it worked. Because the people that were placed in the government was appointed by the U.S. And those people that were in the government, the governors and so on and so forth, they were also Puerto Rican citizens. Some of them were white. Some of them were white. It was either Puerto Rican or white, honestly. But they supported the sterilization and they supported the mass sterilization and they used that propaganda to continue sterilizing. Okay, so now keep in mind, time frame wise, right? Because everybody likes to think this happened, so long ago. Okay, troops came in 1898. We are now in the 1960s, and you have a third of the population is sterilized, and they have no idea what that even fucking means. All for profit. All for profit. Right? 1960s. Do you know how long ago that was?
Not that long ago.
Less than 100 years ago. I'm going to tell you that right now. It was 65 years ago.
Yeah.
There are people who are still alive who went through this.
Yeah.
Who talk about it.
Yeah.
Still.
Yep.
So anyways, I'm going to just keep on keeping on. So they have no representation in the U.S. government as well, but the men could be drafted into the army. So basically,
which is wild. Like, so I don't technically have anything to do with the United States, but if you need me for your military, I can go.
Yeah.
But if I vote for something, it doesn't matter.
Totally different thing. But they sent a shit ton of Puerto Rican men over to Korea.
That's so funny.
Oh yeah. So, this further reduced the need for workers, which reduced the need for excess population. By 1953, 17%, or about 1/5 of all Puerto Rican women had already been sterilized. Between 1956 and 1976, well over 20,000 women had been sterilized. They were sterilized so much that they had to close down schools. They had to close down schools because there was not enough children. There was 1 year where they had no births. None. Because of population control. So by the 1970, the census showed that the population hadn't increased and the sterilization program was celebrated. Literally, they came out online, not online, but on the TV, and they were celebrating this, and the government was celebrating this. Keep in mind, this is still federally funded. The government is funding this. As a matter of fact, at this point, the government had increased funding for sterilization and decreased funding for medical assistance by about the same. And then companies around this time profited about 550% because these women were not sterilized. They had clinics. Women would walk in, and there were clinics by the Family Planning Association that was in there handing out pamphlets and promoting women to get sterilized in their work environment, saying it's free. The government will pay for it. One woman talks about how she went to a nurse and she was talking to a nurse and she said, I heard about being sterilized. I would like to get that done. Like, I already have 3 children. I don't, whatever. I would like to get that done. And the lady said, call the mayor. She called the mayor. 4 days later, she was sterilized. It was quick turnaround, and they paid for this shit. The government paid for this shit for these women, and they didn't know. I'm not even at the worst part yet. So anyways, we're going to go back a little bit. So by 1958, New York Times reported that Puerto Rican's population was decreasing due to the successful sterilization programs and forced migration. Remember, you had millions of people who were, at least 1 million people who had migrated at this point. Between 10 to 42% of women in the workforce were sterilized. One factory reported that 42% of their female workers were sterilized. And they celebrated that because they promoted it at the front, at one of those little clinics that was at the front. They promoted that shit. 42% of the women in there were fucking sterilized. These women, again, did not know what they were getting into. They didn't know that it wasn't reversible. Nobody told them that. But don't worry. The doctors did experiments on them so that they could try to figure out if they could reverse it. Let's continue on. The number of children in a home were limited to 2. There was something called the Barceloneta program, which worked with Family Planning Association, which was funded by Joseph Sonnen. He funded about 12,000 sterilizations during this time and used Puerto Rican women to test a contraceptive called MCO foam, which he manufactured himself. The women did not know what it was. They didn't know what it was, and they were being used as guinea pigs to see, and they had crazy reactions. Skin blisters, pustulates, they had burning sensations, they had chemical burns that were occurring, and this was supposed to be put on the genitalia. This was not something that you put on your forehead or your hair or your little, or whatever, your forearm. No, this was on the coochie, bro. They were like, hey, take this foam, it's gonna be cool, it's already been tested, and put that shit up your coochie and see if it works. And these women were getting fucked over by it. And you want to know what else? Is there was an option for men to be sterilized. And when women had to go get sterilized, the men had to sign consent forms for this. The men said, no, I'm not being sterilized. These women could be sterilized. Because it was being put around, a rumor that was being put around, that if men get sterilized, they lose their libido. We can't have that.
No, you can't have that.
We can't have that.
No.
We can't have that happen. It has to be when the women can go do it. They'll go do that, right? But again, everybody was uneducated about it. There was something called the population explosion, which was basically this fear-mongering propaganda for population control in Puerto Rico and in India. So again, they started putting out more propaganda to the U.S. stating that it was like we were packed sardines, like there was just we were all over each other like fucking rats and ants and all sorts of shit, and it wasn't like that at all. There was such a huge migration of people that were leaving, and with the sterilization, there wasn't even births occurring. Some years. It was fucking crazy, but they still put out this propaganda, and they were doing it in India too. This is the part that gets me. By 1956, there were contraception pills that were being dished out to Puerto Rican women in government funding housing. These contraception pills were 20 times more potent than the ones that we take today. They were not tested on anybody else. The contraception that you take today, what you have today is because of the test bunnies that they used as Puerto Rican women in federal funded housing. Because what they did is they went around, these corporations had people go around, these representatives, they went around to these women's homes, and they knocked on the door and they shamed them. And they told them, you can't have this many children. How are you living in a federal funded place and you have all these children? You can't have that many children. Here's a pill that's been fully tested. It'll help you keep from getting pregnant. You don't have to do the sterilization if you don't want to. You can just take this pill. Some of these women died. Some of these women died. Some of these women prayed for death because they were in so much pain. Some of these women passed out for hours while their children were sitting by themselves. Some of these women had such horrible pain and horrible cramps and dizziness and nausea that they couldn't function. They couldn't function. And that was one pill. That was just the one pill that they took the first time. That was it. And then people came back and they collected their data on these women, and they went around, and now we have beautiful contraception pills that are out here that also destroy our systems, all because of Puerto Rican women.
You know what's really sad about, not to cut you off, sad about all of the injustices done to Puerto Rican women, black women, just women in general, not in general because minority women, is that a lot of the advances in medicine exist because we were experimented on.
Yeah.
A lot of the procedures for surgeries exist because we were experimented on.
Yep. Yeah. Obstetrics in general. Like obstetrics in general wouldn't be a thing if it wasn't for the fact that white slave owners experimented on black women.
And they that's a whole nother thing.
Yep. So I also want to point out that these women had no idea what they were taking. They had no idea what they were taking. They were told by these nurses that everything was going to be okay. And these nurses were also Puerto Rican women. They were also out here, but these nurses also didn't know, just kind of similar to that. They did not know.
Which is so messed up because, like, I don't think anybody ever thinks of the repercussions of this stuff, right?
They don't.
Because you have, now you have somebody who you're eliciting to do these things for you.
Yeah.
Who are unaware.
Yep.
Imagine their shock when they find out that they're the reason why some of this stuff has happened.
So one of the women that were being interviewed there, the Ana Maria Garcia, when she was doing the interviews, because she's the one that went around and talked to these women, when she was doing the interviews, which is so funny because it was in 1981 and she was there filming people still going to the homes. So this was still occurring in the 80s, which was 40, 50 years ago. You know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
This was still occurring.
Yeah.
So anyways, fun little tidbit. The founder of Planned Parenthood, Margaret Sanger, as well as Dr. Clarence Gamble, founder of Pathfinder International, they were both involved in these trials. They were very much aware and helped conduct these trials for contraceptive pills. Contraception pills. I keep saying contraceptive, but you know what I mean. Okay, so U.S. In Latin America in general, just a little side note from the documentary. There was something called the Association of International Development. It was the U.S. Association of International Development increased the budget, which I think I said this earlier, increased the budget for birth control programs to $100 million between the years of 1968 and 1972, while reducing healthcare assistance by the same amount. By 1977, Dr. Richard Ravenhold said that the U.S.'s goals were that, sorry, let me repeat that. You may have to edit that. 1977, Dr. T. Ravenhold said that if U.S. goals were met, 1/4 of the world's women would be sterilized to prevent revolutions that would interfere with the financial interests of multinational corporations. 1/4 of the world's, this is not just Puerto Rico. This is the Congo. This is India. This is everywhere. This is everywhere. And this is minorities. This is minorities. And 1/4 of the women is what they were hoping for. The U.S. was hoping for with sterilization. So AID, or the Association of International Development, prevented about 10 to 12,000 births per year. Their goal was to eventually reach 100% of women in childbearing years after 2 childbirths to be sterilized. They wanted to have everybody sterilized after 2 children. Their main goal was to target the women who were staying at home. They placed family planning clinics in the factories, which I've said that. So in the 1970s at this point, right? So when they started off doing the sterilization, they promoted this as a way to bring in wealth into the country,
right,
to bring in wealth and do all of this, right? So we had said by the 1950s, it was 37% was unemployment, 1940s, 1950s, right? 37% was unemployment. At this point in the 1970s, inflation and unemployment were so alarming. About half of the population was on food stamps. Half of the fucking population was on food stamps. And a third of the operations bootstrap corporations, you remember the little corporations that came in and were like, we want to use your land for tax-free exempt bullshit? They left. They dipped.
Of course they did.
They said, we out.
They said, we did what we need to do. Thank you so much. Figure it out.
Yeah, they went to other third world countries.
And they did the same shit.
And they did the same shit there. So leaving thousands and thousands unemployed, right? By 1974, a government report again recommended increased migration sterilization. Another program led by Dr. Silva sterilized another 24,000 women within 2 years. Within 2 years. That is
That's insane.
That is 1,000 women per month.
That's insane.
That is 1,000 women per month. As a matter of fact, let me go ahead and do that math so I can just give you a little goddamn perspective, right? So in a month, you have 30 days in a month, 1,000 women per month. That is about 33 women per day. 33 women per day were getting sterilized for 2 fucking years. On one island. On one country. One country. On October 31st, 1974, Puerto Rican independent leaders accused U.S. of genocide in a UN meeting, and that was the first time. That was the first time there had been light shed on that. That there was this amount of sterilization going on. Because remember, there was the propaganda, there were the commercials, there were people showing everything in the United States. There was all of this that was going on. This was the first time. This started in the 1930s. That is almost 45 fucking years later. Somebody spoke up and said, we can't have this happen anymore. We can't have our people being experimented on anymore. We can't have this population control so that the U.S. can come in and use our fucking soil. That is wild to me. And it was a man. It was a man. Because no, we didn't have voices. We couldn't say anything about it. We didn't say anything about it. So on October 31st, 1974, Puerto Rican independence leaders accused the U.S. of genocide in a UN meeting. Government statistics claim that by 1974, over 200,000 or 35% of women in Puerto Rico have been sterilized. Dr. Silva became the director of OBGYN department of Lincoln Memorial Hospital in New York. Yeah.
We appreciate all that you did. Please come up here and be the director.
In New York. So they did this in New York. So now remember how they forced migration over to New York and they forced migration here into the U.S. And a lot of people went into New York because New York was where you had jobs. New York is where you had money. People moved to New York and that they find out this is where you can go to try to make a life, right? So this motherfucker goes into the Lincoln Hospital, which is located in the South Bronx, which is a poor Puerto Rican neighborhood in New York City. The government stopped paying for abortions by this time, but continued paying for sterilization of minority women in low-income neighborhoods. So he continued to do this in the South Bronx. And there were women that were there, that these women were coming out and they were doing the same thing, double over in pain and having to go home and doing all of this. Now in South Bronx, I don't know if they were doing full hysterectomies or if it was still a salpinectomy, a bilateral salpinectomy. But that's what they were doing. They decided to go there and do population control in the South Bronx. It wasn't enough to take over to take over Puerto Rico. They had to go into where they forced Puerto Ricans to go to through coercion, so that they can go ahead and start sterilizing people there. So, anyways, by 1980, Puerto Rico is the country with the highest number of sterilizations in the entire world, in the whole world. This tiny little country. If you ever look on a map and you look at Puerto Rico, it's very small. It's a teeny tiny little island, and it is the number one place for sterilization by 1980. Experimentation to reconnect the fallopian tubes failed. So, They decided to go in and they decided, well, we're going to try to help these women out. The reconnection of fallopian tubes, what they did was they pulled, it failed 80% of the time. They didn't know what the fuck they were doing. They took 2 little plastic tubes, not even sterile, 2 little plastic tubes, and they went in to reconnect the fallopian tubes. What was happening is that if women were even able to get pregnant and their body wasn't rejecting it, they were losing everything because they were having pregnancy couldn't go to full term. They were having ectopic pregnancies essentially, but you got to remember it's not a fallopian tube. I mean, ectopic pregnancies in general is basically where you end up getting impregnated, but it's stuck in the fallopian tube.
It's very dangerous.
It is very dangerous, very painful, and you can die.
Yeah, you can die.
You can die. One of the women that were talking on there, she was talking about it, and she said everything in her was destroyed. Her uterus, her ovaries, everything. She had excessive bleeding. She had pain. She had all of this. She found out she was pregnant. She was going to the doctor, and it was in the tube. She described it as everything inside of me was in pieces. I mean, it was crazy. There was women that were actually dying from this.
Not surprising.
Yeah. So by the 1970s, there was about 60% of the population was below the poverty line. So that's over half of the population was below the poverty line. Unemployment rates doubled within 1960 to 1970. And at that time, the U.S. corporate factories and all of that, they profited about 550%.
So they were booming. Job well done.
They were booming. The thing is I tried to look and see what was going on with it to this day. The Family Planning Association is still in effect. So they don't have a lot of information out. There's not a lot of information as to whether or not sterilization is still being pushed. I actually can't find anything. And I searched for about 2 hours. I can't find shit on whether or not this is still occurring. If it's being pushed, if doctors are telling women, I think there's a lot more people who are educated now, especially on the island. You have, universities where a lot of people go and so on and so forth. And there's a lot of the medical schools that are on the island are fucking brilliant. And actually a lot of the medical students at that time, during all of these, because there was a medical student on there talking about it. Well, a doctor, full-blown doctor, but she was a medical student there on the island, a white woman. And, she and other medical students realized that they were operating on them. They were experimenting on these people. They knew that. They were using these women as guinea pigs. And they were effectively trying to have population control. So it's crazy. People knew what was going on.
Yeah.
And there's no information as to whether or not it stopped. I just want to make that very clear. There's no information on whether or not it stopped. There's also not a lot of information on whether or not it's continuing either. But nobody's gotten justice for that. The U.S. still uses the island for their own purposes. We can't even get supplies over there sometimes. The fucking electrical grid over there is absolutely shit. Puerto Rico just didn't have a power for
They didn't have power for a while after Irma.
And Maria.
Yeah. But I know I had gone after Irma, and I went quite a bit after Irma happened, and they still didn't have power.
Yeah, they didn't have.
Or they did have power, but it was so like,
and it was
unstable.
only in the tourist spots.
Yes.
Yeah. So, because my aunt who lives there, she did not have power for quite a few months after Maria, and my dad send his generator over after Irma, because I think it was Irma and then Maria. Mm-hmm. So,
I don't know, but yeah.
Yeah, something like that. One of them. After one of the big hurricanes, my dad sent a generator over. But yeah, the electrical grid system out there is absolutely shit. They still have factories that are out there. I mean, the government that's out there is not really there for the people. They're there for American
money.
Profits. They're there for profits. It's very dirty. And I mean that in the sense of like, it's corrupt. It's very corrupt, and we can thank the U.S. for that. So, the mass sterilization of my people, Deidre's people, all of our people, except for white people, is for profit. Is for profit. They took an entire country that was just doing their own thing, and they came in and they used it for their own money, and they forced women and coerced women to become sterilized.
And you know what's really crazy about this? We are only talking about our specific groups. of people. Well, you talked about overall, and I just talked about prison systems.
Yeah.
And so, but there's a lot of other groups that were also affected.
Absolutely.
With these same procedures. And, you know, one of the things that they said in the documentary was that some of the doctors were just experimenting because they wanted to see what happened.
Yeah.
And and the thing that made that really crazy is a lot of the women that they were doing this to, they didn't have any issues. They weren't having like cramps or like heavy bleeding or nothing like that. They were just like, hey, I mean, let's just see what happens. They might have come in for, the thing that was crazy was for some of them, they were coming in for random procedures.
Yeah.
And while they were in there, they're like, well, since we're here,
yeah, we'll just take it out.
let's just see what happens.
Yeah. Yep.
It is terrible.
This is
so
a long episode.
I want to give a hearty fuck you to Dr. Heinrich. Fuck you.
Yeah.
Fuck you. And fuck all the people that worked with you, that were well aware, all the board people that were well aware that was going on, all of those people who voted against protecting these women. Just hearty fuck you.
Yeah.
Hearty fuck you.
Dr. Silva, the founder of Planned Parenthood, all of you can suck some dirty asshole. Big old fuck you to all of you guys. It fucking breaks my heart because I'm just, why do you hate us so much? Why do you hate us so much? I just don't understand. Why do you feel the need to experiment on us? Why do you feel the need to treat us the way you do? We are not less than. We are people.
We're people. But you're welcome for helping you find things to help other people. You're welcome.
You can thank, you can't even say ancestors because they're still, some of these people are still alive. So, and yeah, oh, by the way, the range, I wanted to mention the range. The range for sterilization was anywhere between 15 and 42.
That's what's really crazy as well, because they were doing these to young girls.
Young girls.
And with no regard for, which kind of goes back to the idea that Black and brown kids are not kids.
Yeah.
They don't give a fuck.
They don't care.
They just don't.
They don't care. Okay. Ooh, that was a heavy episode. So listen, y'all, we are very sorry. This is a long episode, and we appreciate you being here, and we appreciate you being informed. But the reason for me why I wanted to do this and why I wanted to talk about this is because for me, this podcast is a place for women to know your history. And a lot of history and information and opportunities to learn about health, like we did our menopause episode, all of these things, like we really want this to be a safe place for women, but also for minority women. We want this to be a safe place specifically for minority women. We want to educate other people. We want other people to learn and know about the history of what has happened to us. We also want to talk about how men ain't shit. We want to talk about how men are shit. We want to talk about how some women ain't shit. We want to just talk about whatever we want to talk about on here, but we want to also be informative. And this was a very important topic for us to talk about because it is something that has occurred and has been occurring for a very long fucking time and will still probably continue to occur. And when I mean that, I mean the experiment on us. Experimenting on it.
Yeah.
So we appreciate y'all sticking around and being here. If you found any of this information conducive to you, please reach out to us. Let us know. If you have anything that you want to add to it, please let us know. If there's a correction or anything that you want to tell us, please let us know. We'd love to hear it. If you have a strong opinion about why you hate us, we'd also like to know that too. I'd like to understand why the fuck you hate us. So please, by all means, we are here. We're open to listen. And then do you have anything else you want to talk about? No?
This was a lot.
This was a lot.
Yeah.
We're going to go out now and we're going to go have a good time and celebrate the fact that we are living and we are alive. And, yeah. Thanks for being here, y'all. Bye.